Hello and welcome to a humble Highland home. Thank you so much for joining me here today. I thought I would do a wee video note to my future self today, showing what I've got growing in the garden. It always helps with next year's planning. Chives are well on the way to flowering now. This will be their second year growing in this area, so they're really starting to get themselves established. And part of the view from the kitchen window is this beautiful rhododendron, which is currently in full flower. This was the first apple tree that I planted here, which is an apple sunset, which is similar to a cock's apple, and it should provide fruit in September. The tree's grafted onto a rootstock, so it won't grow to full height, which will make it more manageable for me when it comes to pruning. And this is a plum tree that I purchased last autumn, so hopefully I'll get it planted this autumn. Blueberry patch lines part of the pathway up to the garden, which my grandchildren love, as we do encourage getting snacks from the garden. I have one older bush that I've had for many years, and I've got one newer one which are planted directly into the ground, and I've also got one in a pot. But actually the one in the pot is fruiting a lot more than the other two are. This was our second apple tree that I planted last autumn. It's a Braeburn and it should produce us fruit in October, so hopefully we get a steady supply of apples during the cooler months. This tree is also on a grafted rootstock to restrict the height for this area of the garden. I have 3 pots of thornless blackberries that are waiting to be planted out, but I don't have the space prepared for them, so they'll have to stay here for a little while. And embracing the permaculture principles of the food forest, at the base of the apple tree, in amongst the grass clippings, I have some chickpea plants. This blackcurrant bush was originally a cut-in a few years ago when I did some volunteer work in a community garden, and it's growing well where it is now in its new home. And this is where I planted the 3 crowns of asparagus a few weeks ago, with 2 of the crowns showing a couple of tiny asparagus sprouting up. These are definitely give hope for the future, but I did a video about this, which I will link in the description below. Both rhubarb plants have recovered from when I took a harvest from them, and they're sprouting more stems now after I pulled off the seed pods to prevent them from going to flower. This is the crown that I relocated last autumn, so it's just in its recovery process this year. Hence why I want a lot of its energy to go back into the crown rather than producing lots of growth and flowers, and it will be stronger again over the years to come. The borage is getting ready to bloom its beautiful flowers, much to the bees' delight. I've been adding some of the leaves to the compost to give the compost a wee boost, but it's also good to provide ground cover along with the rhubarb. But at some point I will need to split it and give everything a little bit more space and gain another plant elsewhere in the garden. I have 2 patio cherries that I purchased last autumn, either side of the greenhouse door. I've never grown these before, so if you do have any tips, then please share them. These are second early tatties, which should be ready in mid to late June. This area still needs lots of plants to be tidied up, but I'm getting there. The greenhouse is an absolute hive of activity at the moment, with lots of seeds, seedlings, and also heat-loving plants. I've got various flowers on the go to brighten up the garden, hopefully. That includes zinnias, nasturtiums, sunflowers, marigolds, tall marigolds and small marigolds. We've got various herbs. We've got courgettes, yellow and green varieties. We've got pumpkin. I've never grown pumpkin before, so hopefully I've got enough space for it. And watermelon, not sure how well that'll do in the Highlands of Scotland, but we'll give it a go. And also the cucumbers and tomatoes that we're getting ready to get planted out. I've been tidying up this area to finish digging in this end of the polytunnel. I've been putting some membrane down in this area as I know that I won't be planting directly into the ground around here. And I'm putting a small pathway of stones around the edge, and this is to try and keep out any wee beasties, avoid muddy areas, because we've got lots of stones to use up. I like to use wood chip on the pathways next to the growing areas, as the garden is actually on a double slope, so I use the wood chip to harvest as much of the winter rain as I can and encourage it to soak into the paths and then to feed the plants. These carrots are a variety called Autumn King, and I planted them as a wee experiment late last summer. I wanted to see if they would grow in such a shady spot at this end of the polytunnel. They managed to survive, and even with all the snow coming off the top of the polytunnel, but they've bounced back and now they're doing pretty well. The spinach hasn't been doing too great here. I started it off in the greenhouse along with some other salad leaves and planted them out, but it just doesn't seem to be doing too great here. And in between all the salad leaves here, I've got another planting of radish so that I have a steady supply of radish throughout the year. Well, that's the aim anyway. And I really like my radish either stir-fried or roasted. Lovely. I will leave a list of everything that we're growing and the varieties in the description below. This is my onion and carrot bed. The onion sets were from the smallest onions that I grew last year, and they seem to be growing really well. But the onions that I've grown from seed are just not very happy at all. In fact, I think I will end up taking them out and replanting something else in here instead. And I think I need to do a couple of experiments with the onion seeds. In between the onions, I have my first row of carrot seeds, which have been under the wood for a couple of weeks. So I'm about to plant the second row and wait a couple of weeks, and then I'll plant the third row, just so that we've got a steady supply of carrots throughout the winter time, as we can just leave them in the ground if need be. And here I have some sweet peas and nasturtiums that hopefully will climb up this support and encourage all our lovely pollinators into this area of the garden. And here is part of my experiment with some shop-bought chickpeas that I just had in the kitchen, and I decided to grow them alongside my garden peas, and they all took. So I've been planting them everywhere I possibly can to see if we can get them to produce some chickpeas for us. Chickpeas are sharing a growing space with some Maris Piper main crop potatoes. I was very late in lifting my tatties last year, so the frost got at them, so I didn't get much of a harvest. So hopefully this year I'll be on the ball and I'll get them lifted as soon as they're ready. And at the end here I've got some bolt hardy multi-sown beetroot, which the slugs have been having a wee chew at one end, as you can see where the greenery is, and at the other end is where the slugs have been. But hopefully they'll be able to recover. And in the next growing bed, I've got the pea and bean frame up, and I'm growing varieties of peas called pea alderman and Kelvin Wonder, and also some home saved seeds. And in between, I've got some beautiful sweet peas that hopefully will bring a lovely scent and some bright colours to help our pollinators. Along the other side of the frame, we'll soon be home to all our bean seedlings. This is the latest bed that I've been working on, and it's now become home to some more brassicas. It's got some broccoli seedlings, which the seeds were home saved, and also some red and green cabbage. The frame for the EnviroMesh will do for a couple of weeks, but then I will have to look at getting something a little bit bigger. Time and space can always be an issue, especially at this planting time of the year, but nature can be pretty forgiving, for the most part anyway, but she'll always work in her own pretty way. This is where I had my peas and beans last year, so I want to make the most of the nitrogen that hopefully they've left behind in the soil, and I've turned it into a brassica bed. Now this is just a temporary bed, it might be for a couple of years as I want to use this space for something else, but we'll make the most of it this year. In this bed I have some Chinese cabbage, some kale and some cauliflower, all under the EnviroMesh to prevent the cabbage butterfly. All these plants were planted from seed. They were grown on in the greenhouse, and then once the risk of the frost had passed, then they were all planted out. Winter fleece wasn't too far away though, just in case we do experience a cold snap. Moving on to the end of the polytunnel, I still need to tidy up this area, but as you can see there are lots of stones, nettles and weeds, so it's not top of my list just now, but I do need to get round to it. My main aim was to get the growing spaces productive, so now that we've got those working, I want to be able to maintain them, and any other development work has to come second. Making most of the space in the polytunnel, I've got another bucket of second early tatties here, which should be ready in June. I've been harvesting lots of radish from 2 different plantings, and I'll be looking to get these removed very soon as I start clearing the space ready for the next seasonal plantings of tomatoes and cucumbers. This is another fruit tree that I bought last autumn. It's a nectarine. I've never grown one before, so this will be a new experience for me. And next to the nectarine, I have 3 different stages of growth of leeks. The bigger leeks were grown on last year and overwintered, and the smaller ones were grown this year and will be transplanted out. But all these need to come out ready for the tomatoes. The tomatoes have been waiting very patiently for their turn to get planted out into the polytunnel, but it won't be long now. We hung some guttering either side of the polytunnel. One had the peas and chickpeas in them, and one had some seedlings, and it saved space and it prevented the mice getting at the peas. Worked really well, and I would definitely do it again. And I had a couple of volunteer broccoli plants and some parsley, so I'll just leave them there. They probably will just go to seed when it heats up in the summer, but I'm a big fan of volunteer plants, so I'll just leave them just now. These are the last of the purple sprouting broccoli that survived the really sharp frost at the beginning of the year. And then at the back of it, we've got some wild rocket that again I planted in autumn time last year, and I've done really well in the hungry grap this year. And the purple sprouting broccoli, I've just been using the leaves as spring greens because they're all edible, but they'll all need to come out soon to make way for the tomatoes and cucumbers. And the purple sprouting broccoli is very lucky to actually get to the kitchen because I love to eat it raw, straight from the garden. All these things are starting to go to seed now, including the pak choi. I'm trying to save some of the pak choi seeds for next year's planting. As I do my next clearing for the seasonal planting, it will make space for the row of onions that I have growing and a row of carrots that I've got in between the onions, and then at the other side we have the garlic that was planted in autumn and has been growing over winter and throughout the springtime. I'm growing two different varieties of garlic. One was saved from last year's garlic cloves, and the other one was shop bought. And actually, the home saved garlic cloves are doing a lot better than the shop bought one this time. Both varieties are hardneck, so it's more suitable for growing in our northern conditions. Along this row I've got another bucket of second early potatoes of a variety called Charlotte, and then I've got some Bolt Hardy multi-sown beetroot, which is doing a little bit better than what it is outside, but I think that's down to the heat. And then along from that we've got some kohlrabi, which is doing really well. And then I've got a few onions that were left over from the beds outside, so I just popped them in the polytunnel just to see how they would fare, and they're actually doing better than the seedlings that I put outside. And then up here in this corner we've got some perpetual spinach. I tried to utilise some of the headspace with some baskets of strawberries, but I just don't think we get enough sunlight to ripen up those strawberries, so I might have to put them outside to get a bit of sun on them. So it's time to get some of these areas up, get the plants out that are now going to seed, and make the ground preparations ready for the next seasonal plantings. Thank you so much for joining me here today. As I've done a visual note to my future self, let me know how your growing is progressing. But for now, take care of yourself and others, and I'll see you in the next video.